the 26th, Friday of November 2021. Hope everybody's doing okay. So Tepco got a leak at their ice wall. They're going to fix it, he said. As soon as you can find enough homeless people. Of course. And so I just figured I'd come out and explain to you, rather than arguing in comment sections, that it's quicker for me to do it like this than it is to sit there in a comment section for a couple of hours and fight with somebody. Or a bunch of nobodies, I should say. Ice wall full length 1.5 kilometers. And the ice wall goes around the reactors that all melted down, lost their fuel. Put it on the big screen for everybody. Okay, so reactor 1, 2, 3, and 4. This, where I'm to, is the ocean side looking inland. So water is coming down a mountain behind it, and the ice wall is going to direct the water, a flat ice wall. The water is going to go around it, but what happens with a flat wall is water just goes down also and underneath it, because there's no bottom, and over it, because it's not above the ground. Now, instead of building a real wall and walking away, job well done, we'll come back in 100 years when it's safe, somebody is going to have to go down there and look at it. I can see him in the office now. Well, George, you're the senior. It's your job. George says, yeah, I know. You take care, man. Yeah, you take care, George. I'll look in on the family for you. Because that's a death sentence to go down to that ice wall where the neutrons are pounding off the ice wall. The gamma shine, the x-rays, the neutron bursts down there are just absurd. It's the last spot you're going to be is down $12 million a year. It's $12 million a year to maintain the ice wall. Like that's the refrigerator plant. Now they've done ice walls before for very small applications, like where they wanted to freeze the soil so they can build a dam in swampy areas and stuff like this. But instead of putting a wall around this place, because the taxpayers would pay for an experimental wall, which they claim, nobody knows if it's true or not. Only the homeless have ever been there. No nuclear scientists have ever been there. Okay, so the high-priced Fukushima ice wall nears completion, but effectiveness is doubted. A total of 260,000 people courageously worked side by side of a nuclear meltdown, valiantly to build an ice wall to save the Pacific Ocean. Now, it was $300 million was the original number they gave out. 260,000 people. If you don't spend any money on the wall and you just pay everybody $1,186, you're out of money. And this was a fable so that you stop looking. I'll explain to you. Tepco to abandon the Riva, which is France's system, for contaminated water. So this is 2014. Tokyo Electric, which even Fukushima Prefecture government had called for the removal of, said that it ceased use of Ariva's decontamination system since it had not lived up to expectations since it was installed. For the last 3 years, the system has been unused and kept out of operation. And they can't dismantle it because they turn it on for a little tiny bit. It gathered up the radiation. And the workers couldn't even go close to it. So for the last 3 years they had it, they didn't use it except for originally. And so when you put radiation through a filter, don't worry, we'll get to more to the wall coming up. And remember not Shinzo Abe, Sugar, how quickly we forget, eh? Prime Minister, to you, Dana, saying it's unacceptable to have contaminated water leak from the storage plant tanks and flow into the ocean. So the walls were the same thing to stop radiation, stop the water from coming down, mixing, and then going out into the ocean, or that Tepco is going to have to store in tanks. Right? That's why they got the walls, so they don't have to fill up more tanks. So you got 1,000 tanks. They got 1,000 tanks. So it's 2021. They got 1,000 tanks, right? In 2013, August the 20th, 2013, they had 1,000 tanks. So you don't find it suspicious that you had 1,000 tanks in 2013? 1,000 tanks in 2014. At one point, they had 1,200 tanks in 2014. Starting to see a bit of a pattern here. 2017, they had 900 tanks. And in 2019, you can see the 1,000 tanks. In 2021, 1,000 tanks. So you had 1,000 tanks in 2013, which is when they were doing the ice wall, started doing the ice wall, by the way. You had 1,000 tanks, or 1,200 tanks in 2014, 900 tanks in 2017, and 1,000 tanks in 2019, and 1,000 tanks in 2021. 1,000 tanks in 2013 and 1,000 tanks in 2021. Now, I counted the tanks, and there were 750. Not trying to be picky, but it's 750. Because I'm not going to get my information from the IAEA because they're not who they claim they are. They're something different. ALP system brought back online June the 23rd, 2014, but that's a misleading statement. The highly radioactive water processed by the system has not only damaged the equipment causing corrosion, the highly radioactive water, but also prevents workers from going close to it because you're getting lethal doses. The workers are the homeless. Hang on. Tepco officials cannot estimate how frequent water will be discharged. So, if it's less than 1 becquerel per liter of cesium-134 and 5 becquerels per liter of cesium-137, or 134, 137 for 1 becquerel a liter, and 5 becquerels a liter of beta-emitting materials, okay, they can't dump it in the ocean. Move ahead. Tepco is still struggling to keep their head above the ground. 2.3 billion becquerels. In each liter, there was 2.35 billion becquerels of cesium and 750 million becquerels of other radionuclides. Well, first off, because they want to keep you lulled into this complacency of just cesium, and as if the reactors ran on cesium or something. The reactors run on uranium, plutonium, the biggest byproduct. Unfortunately, is curium. And curium isotopes, you need lead shielding 20 times thicker than you do for lethal plutonium, which is named after the devil. So these numbers per liter are extraordinary numbers, but this is they're only talking about beta and gamma. They're not talking about alpha or neutrons like plutonium, uranium, and curium and that. So with 5,000 tons captured in, leaking out of this one cable trench and into the ocean, these are extraordinary numbers. Now the tanks, if you fill up the tanks there, you're talking about 1.4 million sieverts at a tank, which means you can't actually build another tank on site because you can't get back on the site, which means the tanks are empty. The tanks are only there. They were built temporarily. Majority of them were bolted together. The theory was to trick you, and because you're only going to keep an eye for a couple of minutes for most people, but for the hardcore couple of years, we'll keep an eye on things, and then you lose the passion, right? But what's going on is they know that, and so the tanks are empty. They're meant to make you think they didn't poison the Pacific Ocean. The whole story is crazy anyway, but bear with me. Tepco finds defects in the Alp systems. Defects, like parts that don't work. And so they got all of these little things were meant to explain away why there was heavy radiation found other places on the site, so to speak. So let's have a look at how crazy they actually are. Instead of evacuating the children, they used water bottles to shield the classrooms to bring down the level of radiation. Now that doesn't work for atoms that are floating around. That only works for the fuel pellets, fuel rods itself emitting energy. But you don't count radiation in unisieverts or microsieverts or millisieverts, you count it in atoms. If you're counting it in that, it's because you're close to the fuel source. It's really deceptive what they've done. Elementary school in Koriyama City, located in Fukushima Prefecture, 34 miles west of ongoing nuclear meltdowns, are using water bottles to shield the radiation from the courtyard to other areas around the school buildings. So they're filling up boxes on the outside and inside of the classrooms too, and it brought the numbers down, which meant that area is covered in fine particulates of the pellets. It's crazy. And children are there every day. The bottles are filled with waters, and they have reduced the radiation levels inside the schools by 1/3. So rather than evacuate the children, the nuclear industry is like, nah, we can't study the lab rats if they evacuate them. Did you ever wonder why they rebuilt Nagasaki, Hiroshima on a nuclear bomb crater? Did that ever come into your train of thoughts? Because you should think about it. It's a pretty sick thing to do. Elementary school using water bottles to save the children. What's going on is there's so much radiation around this site that, first off, you should never use an ice wall. It's absurd. It's ludicrous. It's because you got to keep it frozen 12 months a year. Who's going to go fix it? You can't call a plumber to go fix it. 240 million becquerels per liter beta-ray emitting substances. And more spills into the ocean per liter. The numbers, by the way, are just absurd. These are absurd. So only the homeless and the destitute and the victims of society and the immigrants who don't speak the language. Wow. So we got a poll tonight, if you're into that kind of thing. Should Tepco, not the homeless or the victims of society, but Tepco go there and actually build a real wall without the stupid ice? So they got a wall that's melting at Tepco. Now the wall was built to trick you into thinking they're not killing the Pacific Ocean. That's the only reason that wall was built. But hang on. Tepco submits criteria for dumping. Regulators dump treaty aid. Ignore that one. Tepco begins critical work on the Fukushima Daiichi Reactor 4. And now, Tepco was nationalized immediately after the nuclear meltdown. And so we're talking about the government. You're talking about the nuclear. When you hear Tepco, that's the nuclear industry. So they're saying that there is Unit 4. The date on that is 2013. Now when you zoom in on that, they have a lot of it redacted, pixelated. See that? Pixelated. They're claiming they're getting fuel out of the pool there. But the building actually looked like the building to the left. It doesn't look like that. It looks like to your left. But you see the people on the right? They're pretending they're at the fuel pool with all the redacted. See that there? That's the official picture. And to the left is the official picture.
Where I'm standing is on top of what used to be reactor building number 4. The whole of this building was blown apart by a huge explosion.
We are here inside reactor 4 at the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant that was severely crippled during the earthquake and tsunami of 2011.
Of the decommissioning work taking place here in reactor 4.
At the end of our tour, we were checked for radiation exposure. In 4 hours, I received the equivalent of less than a chest x-ray.
1,500 highly radioactive fuel rods inside this pool. They've got to move them outside of this reactor.
That's just a tiny fraction of the media came out and tried to convince you and your loved ones that everything was just fine. They should build a ice wall around that school we were looking at there earlier. But you should build an ice wall around Japan. So they flew over Japan with airplanes and Geiger counters. And they recorded 1,000 feet above the ground. 3 million becquerels per square meter. 20 kilometers away. So every time it rains, that stuff is washing out into the ocean. Now, that 3,000 becquerels per square meter radiates all the grass, all the flowers, all the trees. So all the pollen is radioactive each year too. All the foliage is radioactive. It kills the bacteria in the forest. So when you have forest fires, they're much more brutal because the wood didn't decay because it doesn't have bacteria anymore. It's like you see in California and British Columbia over the last 4 to 5, 6 years. The supercell storms you're seeing are because of Fukushima nuclear meltdown. Try wrapping your mind around that. I have to do another presentation on that real soon. Tepco emits contaminated water leaking from multiple temporary storage pits. Storage. Now, I'm making fun of the story, and I'll show you why. Because if these bags, for starters, can't shield you from gamma shines, X-rays, and neutrons. And look how big these bags are. That's storage tanks / bags. They're actually bags, and people are walking around on them. I covered 5,000 pictures of this site or something. I got 1,900 pictures from when the original pictures, 1,900 of them. Probably next week is going to be all pictures of the original. Wait till you see that. Because they took down my other site with no emails or no strikes. A couple of months ago, I was out looking for spiders all summer and never found no spiders all summer out in the forest. I was talking to one guy. He said, I didn't know there was spiders in forest. And I asked him what he'd done for a living. He said he was a teacher in Gander, Newfoundland at a high school. And then he told me he was retired. I was like, thank goodness. So these bags, you were talking about millions and millions of sieverts. You can't walk on those bags. The bags have to be 8 feet thick, 12 feet thick to protect the people, the homeless and the destitute and the victims of society. This was show and tell, see? Show and tell that, oh no, the ocean's okay, we got it under control, we got 1,000 tanks, stop looking at us. In 2013, right? And then they said, we got 1,200 in 2014. And everybody stopped paying attention. In 2017, they only had 900. It went backwards. And this is 2013. Yeah, April. And the numbers they were talking about in the bag, 6,000 becquerels per cubic centimeter. My God, boy. These are absurd numbers. So you won't be walking around and stuff like that. Let's not go splitting any hairs. You're not walking around on a period. All of these stories were like the ice wall, right? An ice wall. Everybody like, what? Ice what? You doing what? Yeah, my head hurts. They're like, perfect. It was a public relation campaign. You remember public relation campaigns, don't you? Pretending it looks like that when it don't look like that. It's crazy, man. More contaminated water leaks at Fukushima than reported. So there's a campaign that the ice wall was about getting you look over there, don't look at what's going on, what happened for the last 3 years. Workers were transferring contaminated water between leaking underground storage pits. This is gallows laugh, right? It's like, oh my God, you're supposed to hit the big red button, everybody gets evacuated. So this one was 290,000 becquerels of radiation per cubic centimeter. Because you don't want to tell you what it is per cubic meter. 1,000 liters. These are crazies. But it wasn't, right? Because if it was these kind of numbers, then the bag is so radioactive you can't get close to it again. These are lethal doses. The incident happened one day after Tepco announced a plan to transfer water from the number 3 reservoir. Tepco! It's crazy numbers anyway. All of that, right? Tepco plans to dump water stored at Fukushima Daiichi. And who's going to be there to monitor them again? Japan working to speed up decommissioning. So, like, the tanks can't be full because you can't get on site because of the Bromson lung effect, this breaking effect from the so much radiation. This pulsing energy at 186,000 miles per second. And they hit each other at the speed and they change direction. It's a phenomenon. It creates an X-ray, a nasty, lethal X-ray over the whole site, where you'll actually have constant lightning going off all around this. Within kilometers of this area, you would have sustained lightning, something like you would see on Mars maybe, or some other. Japan working to speed up decommissioning. That's scary words. They pay the workers $11 USD per day for their efforts. Does that sound like nuclear scientists? Mom, nuclear scientists are only making $11 a day at Fukushima. No, honey, it's just the homeless. Oh, that's okay. I gotta go play a video game. Bye, Mom. In Fukushima City, 90,000 houses are eligible for decontamination. Pregnant women get a free new house there, by the way. So far, only 4,000 houses have been cleaned. You can't clean houses that are radioactive. It's like going out and buying apples, coming home and skinning all the apples and just eating the skin off the apples. It's weird. Like these houses have to be covered in a containment, then dismantled, then all that goes into containers, and then that gets shipped to a nuclear repository. Because oh my God, it's just awful. The whole story is awful. All these communities. So another phenomenon they had down there. Have you seen this video before? It's out there on the dark web. I'm going to speed it up. It's already going crazy speeds. But you see in the background is steam. This is the China syndrome. And what you see is this lethal steam. This is lethal steam. That's 20 times normal speed right there. And that's over a long period of time, right? That night, over several hours. But this was going on for several years. Now, you need the right conditions for the steam to manifest, right? You need the cold air and that warm air from the 9,000 degree Fahrenheit infernos. The nuclear reactor, of course, that didn't blow up, but actually the ones that went into a China syndrome melted down to the earth at 9,000 degree Fahrenheit temperatures. When they hit the water tables, it detonates the water. The water detonates, and water expands 1,200 feet per second or something, millisecond, for a liter. And so the earth split in 6 places, and the steam that's coming up out of the ground in those places was over 10 sieverts per hour. And the Geiger counters, the stationary Geiger counters, but that's their max, was 10 sieverts per hour. But all of the Geiger counters in the area maxed out. But they had to evacuate, obviously, the site. And whoever got walked through the steam would have died immediately. That's still going on down there, by the way. I don't know if that'll bring any comfort. Tepco gets approval to release more Fukushima water into the Pacific. These headlines are endless. Tepco admits the ice wall will not stop groundwater from entering the Daiichi reactor building. Oops, my bad. I lied to you. So instead of building a real wall, they built an ice wall. I laughed because I covered it originally, right? Was it 8 years ago or something? I covered this constantly. Here we are, full circle, 8 years later. Wow, we got 17 people on my show. That's because I already covered it 8 years ago, see? Otherwise, I would have like 18 or 19 people on my show. Oh, you're not censored, Dana. Nobody cares. This week, Tepco officials had a meeting with officials from the nuclear regulation authorities in Japan admitted the ice wall they promoted as an impermeable barrier to prevent groundwater from entering the crippled. You got the nerve to call that there crippled. Does that look like a 190-foot building to anybody? By the way, that's me right there on the ground. Each one of them are shot individually, and then I inserted them into the camera, but they weren't for that purpose. It's a long story. I won't do it to you. So, that's a pretty fancy headline right there. Tell you what, Tepco admits the ice wall will not stop the groundwater. Oh, and by the way, it'll melt down from chain reactions. Tepco gets approval to release more water into the Pacific. Bye-bye, Pacific. Tepco says groundwater bypass operation not having an effect. And the fence is coming up. According to Tepco, blah, 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 Tepco, la, 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 Tepco, told reporters that 2 months after beginning pumping operations, utility had yet to see any effects from the operation on water levels in the reactor buildings. It has a groundwater bypass operation. It has an ice wall, has a fence, it has the big bags, it has all these tanks. Everything is meant to lull you into believing that nothing is getting into the Pacific. That's what that's all about. Now, the problem with that whole story was, when you look at the damage to the reactors, you look at Tepco's numbers and you model them, you end with models of plutonium covering the entire planet at the one time. Right? You got all these. France done a model on cesium. This is France's model of cesium radioactive fallout covering the Pacific immediately with a continuous plume. And when you look at it, that's the Atlantic, and over there is the Pacific. That's Europe. America's in the middle. Canada's right above it. And so putting an ice wall around it was meant to distract you from that, so you don't think about stuff like this. Oh, Dana, they got an ice wall around the plant, Dana. You got any idea how many times I heard that? Because it was a campaign. It was a campaign to brainwash the population. You're like, Dana, that's not true. Hang on, I got just a thing for you. Just a thing for you. Meet the father of global warming. Oh, while you're at it, meet the father of net zero. Oh, while you're at it, meet the father of the carbon footprint. And how do we get that to get smaller, I wonder, for you? The idea of a personal carbon footprint was popularized by a large advertising campaign of the fossil fuel company BP. So this was an advertising campaign brought you carbon footprint. The United Nations jacked Miles net zero, and the father of global warming is global warming. Then they were only left with one other one. It was climate change, Mr. Climate Change himself, James Hansen, whose single testimony was pivotal, turning point in the history of the global climate change and marked the official beginning of global climate change policy debates. Father of climate change, father of global warming, father of net zero, and BP oil, scumbag BP oil, the father of carbon footprint. And so the Constipated Party 26 this year was based on those four entities. Advertising campaigns were so successful, United Nations said, yeah, let's run with it. Never waste a crisis, right? That's what they've done to you, whether you accept it or not. If you're realistic and you look at it, you'll find out, son of a gun was right. Tepco again plans to dump water stored at Fukushima. Tepco, Japanese ice wall. We're almost finished. Just a couple more to go. Tepco gets approval to dump more water in the Pacific. Wait, now, here we go. 280 billion becquerels per hour. So a gram of cesium is 34 billion atoms by 100. So the buildings that don't exist anymore, by the way, That's supposed to be reactor 3. The buildings don't exist anymore. I'll show you what it actually looks like. Here you go. Fuel pools and reactor cores were at the top of the building. 190-foot building, 19-story building. They're completely gone. All over the hemisphere. Cesium found in Japan steel exported to South Korea. They had to ship it back because it was too high. 280. When you talk about, that's big numbers, by the way, but it's nowhere near the truth. Multiply that by hundreds of millions, and you get close to the truth. You get in the same highway as the truth. You brought in the celebrities to tour the plant. She's pretending she's in the building to your left at the fuel pool that no longer exists, nor does the building. Can't bring the contaminated water issues under control. So the ice wall is the distraction, see? Same as all of the stuff I'm showing you. It's about trying to convince you there's nothing happening to the Pacific. There's certain parts of the plant they don't even have control over. They can't go to because it's lethal doses. The tanks were hastily built to hold highly contaminated water. So the leaks would have, if they were actually filling it up with the highly contaminated water, you couldn't get back on the site. The Advanced Liquid Processing System, ALPS, has yet to function. As April the 12th, 2014. So 2014, this happened March 11, 2011, means 3 years of the Arriva system didn't work because they couldn't even get close to it once they turned it on. And the homeless, that is. They taught the homeless how to use it. And then the same thing with the ALPS water filtration system that they're claiming now has got everything taken out except for sunshine and bananas and potato chips. And they just billions and billions at it, hundreds of billions at it. Tepco says they're running out of room to store contaminated debris also. So what they done was they built incinerators on the site because the prevailing winds blow that to North America, to Canada and the United States, the whole continent. Tepco to nearly double contaminated water storage capacities by 2016. They had 1,000 tanks, as I showed you earlier, in 2013. Tepco shuts down the ALPS system after contamination found in the storage tanks. So this is a neat lie, what they've done right here, right? So they said, oh, well, we got a leak in the storage tanks. And what they're claiming is they got to go in and clean the tanks. That could take a year or something, right? That's what they're saying. When you're putting water from nuclear meltdowns, if you were stupid enough, which is 2.2 sieverts per liter, so a gallon is a lethal dose right away. The tanks are not thick enough to shield you on the outside from this, by the way. And because you're talking about fuel particulates, it'll gather up on the bottom and create its own sustained chain reaction. The same with the ice wall. They were warned about that with the ice wall, where the neutron burst would ricochet off the wall and cause chain reactions to happen, in little small chain reactions, but big enough to blow a hole through a tank, for instance, or a wall. But the wall idea was you got $12 million a year to maintain the ice wall. This is literally the stupidest thing imaginable, when if you were sincere, you would have just built a wall. Who's going to go down there and fix it? Who wants that job? Kiss your loved ones goodbye. And so once they turn it on, they can't get there. They're always wearing paper suits, and they're always perfectly clean. Never got any tools. They are tools. Tepco begins work on underground ice wall at the Fukushima Daiichi. Enormous amounts of cooling water injected around the clock to prevent the melted fuel from overheating. Going into a recriticality, another chain reaction, another nuclear meltdown. The problem with the story was that it's better to show you, tell you. Enormous amounts of coolant water. Well, it's 4,500 tons, 1 million gallons a minute is what the reactors typically need. If you were just talking about a reactor. Once it melts down, you're going to need, take the 4,500 one-ton pickup trucks of water every minute to keep it cool. The hoses they were using was 300 tons a day. You got to remember, all the infrastructure was washed away for 680 kilometers. There was no infrastructure. Everything started melting down. The plumes covered the planet immediately. And they concocted all of these stories. And here it is Saturday night, I'm forced to come out and bludgeon their fake narrative. The exhaust stacks, by the way, are lethal doses, 25 sieverts. But yet they're claiming to be in the reactor when they can't even go near the exhaust stacks. Exhaust stacks, yeah. Those stacks. They're hammered. That's why these places are surrounded by farms. Jamaica won't take the cars because they're radioactive. Japan plans to accept help, but of course they didn't. They just said it to look good. Japanese government to fund underground wall of Fukushima Daiichi is more criminal charges filed against Tepco. They had 1,000 tanks in 2013, got 1,000 tanks in 2021. A senior ministry official admitted that the Japanese government plans to shoulder the full cost of the operation of the wall at around $470 million rather than build a real wall. Can you imagine how kind of real wall he could have put there for $470 million? Man. Used for a couple of years at most. Tepco's insane. They're all suffering from brain damage from so much radiation. The whole country is polluted. You can't get any water or any food in the country without being incredibly radioactive. And they're distributing that worldwide, by the way. And so claiming that there's 1,000 tons of groundwater rushes into the complex every day, it's infinitely more than this. See, and because that's the number, and what they were claiming for several years, I jumped all over them constantly when they showed up in the media, was that they were filtering the water with the system that didn't work, as I showed you, and then they were injecting that water back into the reactors. It's taking nuclear fuel out, bringing it over to the incinerator building and burning it is the exact same thing, except water is perpetual radiation. It's a perpetual machine. They're constantly pouring this water over it and claims they're sucking it up and putting it into a filtration system. Some goes in a tank, some goes back in the reactor. This is absurdness. These you're talking about dirty bombs. Absurd amount of dirty bombs all day if that was true. But the filtration system becomes so radioactive after 20 minutes or an hour, you can't get close enough to change the filter. But after about 20 minutes to an hour, you can disconnect the water that they're trying to filter, put fresh water into it, and the water coming out the other side will be lethal doses by the liter. It's radiation, for goodness sakes. That's how it actually works. It's a perpetual misery machine. There's no secret that Tepco Electric is incapable of containing the disaster at Fukushima. Fukushima Prefecture requests the Japanese government remove Tepco from management of the Fukushima Daiichi decommissioning. So, if your engine breaks, do you bring it to the guy who mows your lawn, or do you bring it to the gardener? Or do you bring it to the machine mechanics that work on those types of engines? So why aren't they using those people for the decommissioning? How come it's only the homeless and the destitute and the victims of society and immigrants who don't speak the language 500,000 becquerels per kilogram. These are absurd numbers. Japan may have to change decontamination efforts after labor shortage. Oh, poor, what, nuclear scientists won't go there no more because they're only getting $11 a day? That's a joke, right? It's sarcasm. There's no nuclear scientists working at Fukushima. There's no volunteers from nuclear plants around the world. There's no list or waiting list of nuclear power plant employees going to volunteer at Tepco. Okay. Radioactive cesium and calves were higher than the mothers. Yeah, because they're developing the bioaccumulated. Japan's regulatory authorities released new nuclear safety standards. You don't even know that one. I just got 2 more to get through. Tepco communication was severed after evacuating critical workers. I should cover that one, but I'm not. I'm looking for 2 more in particular. I showed you the video of this one. Violent releases of materials. So instead of lethal radiation, it's just violent releases of materials. The official narrative. Violent releases of materials. Which look like that, right? These are lethal doses. And everything they touch now becomes a lethal dose. Radiation has all the most insidious properties. If an alien race was to come to the planet and bring nuclear, it would make sense. Japan failing to live up to the pledge to accept outside assistance. Japan offers United States sympathy money for the disposal of the tsunami debris, but no radiation can get there, Dana. Yeah, well, there you go. So everything you wanted to know about the ice wall, and the ice wall, we skipped past the one story I wanted to show you, obviously, was about where Tepco had promised to build a fence to keep the radiation in, and they told the government not to say nothing because it was going to cost $1 billion, and that would bring their stocks down, and so they couldn't do it. So they just let all the radiation run into the ocean. I never showed you that one, but I told you about it, so sue me. I got the rest of it in for you though tonight. So it's a big fable, right? Now, if you don't understand that, you can go over to the nuclear proctologist site and hang on. Might not be able to get. Yeah, the common spin fuel pool is gone. The whole planet is radioactive because of what Japan's got done. And just bear with me 1 second. So this wasn't a major event. Now Chernobyl was really bad, don't get me wrong, but Fukushima is a monster. And we can't come up with solutions until we admit we got a problem. So I launched research expeditions. I need new pontoons and that thing. They're $20,000. I need a new engine on that too. They're like $16,000 for. There's some good second-hand ones out there, but they disappear. So we've done research over the whole coastline. All over the coast.
Oh, we got the big one.
And what did I find? All the species are permanently gone. All the species are permanently eradicated. So I've done these trips repeatedly, year after year to Alaska. I'm getting old now and busted up, and all my equipment is ran into the ground. But we're still trying. We're still giving her the juice the best we can. We're still doing the best we can. But what you're seeing is an extinction event. I went back year after year. The species The species never came back. They're permanently gone. So if the species don't come back, it means the ocean is sterilized. So you see the big fish, but you won't see the microscopic animals. All the phytoplankton are gone, the majority of it now. Not the, the basis of the food chain, the basis of the oxygen chain, the basis of the carbon sequestering chain. It's been wiped out. And I know that because we've done the research year after year. And the species are unequivocally gone. Not maybe, but they're gone. And we're seeing the same thing now on the East Coast. I apologize, everybody, doing an extra show here tonight. But Tepco's out there puking up those lies. I can't sit in silence. Hi, Colette. Hope you're doing good. Chet. Dana Nasana. Yeah, we never won the war for that. Fukushima revelations. Well, trees can be mummified too, right? They're still alive, that's right, but where's all the birds? Where's all the animals? Where's all the insects? Where's all the biota? Yeah, the species on this planet can live with it, but they end up sick and weak. And Jeff Poor. Hi, Jeff. Daniel Smith. Hugs for everybody. Invisible Rabbit. Timeless Truth. Good night, everybody. God bless everybody. Kevin Blanche. Extra hugs for Kevin. Dennis Jenkins. Just a quick shout out to everybody for calling tonight. Patrick. Yeah, the whole story's crazy, but I mean, it's showing up everywhere in the last few hours. And it's best to challenge you with the documentation in case people are trying to make up their minds. Give them another Jack Tripper. Sandra Churchill. Good night, everybody. James Lucid. Awesome. We had everybody tonight. Nirad Eloft. So how did we do on the poll tonight? We got 16 votes. Because that's a good poll, right? Should Tepco, not the homeless, but Tepco build a real wall without the stupid ice? Because they should have built a real wall. Right? Who knows? Mike Mansfield, I missed him on the way through. Come down to the recent comments, we call it a night. I just know that folder I showed everybody, that's a great folder. That's great documentation, right? You can't beat that stuff. That's crazy. Good night, Colette. Kevin Blanche. That's a long, long war, isn't it? Yeah. Dana Nasana. Good night, everybody. Thanks for everybody. You guys have a nice night. Nice day tomorrow. See you on Monday. Hopefully nothing else comes up. I still need a couple days. We got all the shelves up today in the garage and got everything off the floor onto the shelves. It got dark. The lights won't show up till next week, but it's an amazing difference. Thank you, everyone. God bless. Hugs. Good night, everyone. We'll see everybody Monday. Timeless Truth. Yeah, it was a great poll. Have a great night, folks. Take care. Hashtag ice wall. Just a thumbs up. See everybody Monday.